There's a silence that sits in the soul of every woman who's ever waited. By a phone that doesn't ring, she tells herself stories. She lights candles, pours wine, listens to the whispers of her heart wrapped in the soft veil of deception. And in that quiet, between the text that never comes, the dinner that's rescheduled again, the whispered promises that start to lose their shine, something inside her begins to ache, and yet she stays. Why? It begins like all things do, with a spark, a glance, a thrill that feels so rare, so faded. It must be from another life. He looks at her not just with desire, but with hunger, for understanding, for intimacy, for what he says he cannot find at home. And she believes him because she sees herself in his longing. He makes her feel chosen, special, seen. But oh, how cunning the unconscious mind can be. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." And so many of us, we call it fate. We believe in the romance of the forbidden, thinking the suffering is proof of something real, something sacred, as if pain were a currency to purchase love. But what if we've misunderstood the signs? What if, instead of a soul connection, it's an old wound dressed in new skin? You see, the psyche is a great storyteller, and the unconscious, deep, primal, ancient, loves patterns. It pulls you into relationships that echo the stories you haven't healed from. Maybe he reminds you of a father who was present but unavailable. Maybe the drama keeps you from sitting in the silence of your own becoming. Or maybe it's a way to sabotage the love you think you don't deserve. There's a myth that if he leaves his wife for you, it will mean you've won. That love will finally unfold in the way you've dreamed. But here's a harder truth, one that lives in the eyes of every woman who's been down that road. You will never feel safe, because if he left her for you, how long before he leaves you for someone else? And even if he doesn't, the ghost of betrayal will live in the walls of your shared home. You'll find yourself wondering where he is when he's late. You'll flinch when his phone buzzes, not because you're insecure, but because you now carry the knowledge of how easily one can build a life inside a lie. You'll question every tender word he offers you, because you've heard him offer those same words to someone else, once upon a time, while her back was turned. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's pause, here, in the beginning, in this space of longing and illusion, where hearts are still tender and hope still burns. Let's stay in this space, just for a moment longer, and ask the questions we so rarely allow ourselves to voice. What are you really hoping he'll save you from? What version of you do you become when you wait for crumbs of affection from someone else's table? And most importantly, what is the cost of mistaking intensity for intimacy? The feminine soul is vast, wise, eternal. And yet, we live in a culture that teaches women to shrink, to wait, to accept less, to mistake secrecy for sacredness, to confuse adrenaline with alchemy, to settle for being a beautiful chapter in a story that was never meant to be hers. But this story is older than just you and him. This is the story of Eve and the serpent, of Persephone and the pomegranate, of the wild feminine drawn to forbidden fruit, not because she is reckless, but because she is seeking something more. Meaning, magic, freedom. And yet, true liberation does not come from being chosen by a man who is already claimed. It comes from choosing yourself, again and again and again, until the ache fades, until the silence becomes peace, until your worth is no longer something you negotiate with a man who only visits your world in stolen hours and shadowed lies. There is a path that leads deeper now, beyond the fantasy, beyond the drama, into the underworld of your own psyche. Jung called this the individuation process, the journey of becoming whole. And this heartbreak, this ache, this longing, it is not your enemy. It is your doorway. Shall we go through it together? The reasons are many, but let us take them one by one and see what they reveal. Not just about him, but about you. About all of us, really. Women who ache for love in a world that keeps telling us to wait our turn. Next, we'll speak the truths you've always known, buried beneath your ribs. The truths he will never tell you. The truths your soul is aching to remember. There are truths we keep hidden from ourselves, not because we are weak, but because we are human. The unconscious, as Carl Jung taught, contains all that we are unwilling or unready to face. And in the story of a woman entangled with a married man, we find the perfect mirror of our collective forgetting. Let us walk now through each of the 5 reasons, not as rules, but as reflections. Each one a candle illuminating the cave of the soul. Reason 1. The trust that begins in betrayal can never hold the weight of devotion. Trust is the foundation of all things sacred. But if the roots of your love grow in the soil of secrecy, how will it ever reach the sun? You may believe at first that you are the exception, that your connection is different, that you are not stealing him, because his heart was already gone from her. But here's the hidden truth. Betrayal fractures not just one relationship, but the very architecture of intimacy. The woman who walks into love through a side door will always wonder where the exits are, even if he leaves her for you, even if he marries you one day. There will be a seed inside, your belly that never stops growing. The question, will he do to me what he did to her? And it isn't paranoia. It's memory, embodied memory. Your unconscious remembers what your heart tries to forget. Reason 2, the animus unbalanced, the man is a projection, not a partner. Jung spoke often of the animus, the masculine principle within a woman's psyche. When unbalanced or undeveloped, this inner masculine seeks fulfillment not within, but through external men, often unavailable ones. Why? Because they reflect her own uncertainty about her value, her worth, her wholeness. The married man becomes a symbol of power, of validation, of forbidden affirmation. But symbols deceive when we don't recognize them for what they are. You are not in love with him, not truly. You are in love with what he represents to your unconscious mind. The father you could never fully reach, the self you feel you can't fully be. He becomes a container for all the unlived parts of your psyche. But a projection is not a person. It cannot love you back. And when you finally see him clearly, tired, human, flawed, you may realize you were chasing a ghost dressed in your own longing. Reason 3, karmic echoes. You will reap the energy you sow. There is no moral sermon here. This is not about judgment. This is about energy. Every choice you make creates a ripple through the field of your life. And when you participate in the unraveling of another woman's world, whether you intend to or not, you become part of that karma. You may think, but I'm the one suffering. I cry myself to sleep. I wait for scraps of time. I carry the burden. And yes, that is a deep wound. But the pain you feel now is not because of love. It is the price of entanglement. When you help someone lie, even to themselves, you tie your soul to deception. And what is built in shadow rarely survives the light. Reason 4, the mother wound, healing what he cannot give. Many women who fall for married men carry an unseen wound, a deep hunger for unconditional love, often linked to early emotional abandonment. He makes you feel chosen, but only in pieces, only in moments. And that inconsistency mirrors a deeper psychological pattern, the belief that love must be earned through pain, through waiting, through sacrifice. This is not love. This is trauma reenactment. And no man, not even one who promises to leave his wife for you, can ever fill the place that only your own self-healing can reach. If he were to become yours tomorrow, you would soon discover that the emptiness remains, because it was never really about him. It was about you, searching for a lost part of yourself in the arms of someone who is not free. Reason 5, the archetype of the lover but never the queen. In Jungian psychology, archetypes shape our inner world. When you date a married man, you are placed by default into the archetype of the lover, not the wife, not the queen, not the sovereign. The lover is intoxicating, yes. She is beauty, seduction, passion. But she is also disposable. She is not the one to be introduced to his parents. She is not the one who holds the center of his world. And here lies the wound. You were born to be a queen, but you are settling for being the beautiful escape. You are worthy of more, of mornings filled with sunlight instead of secrets, of hands that hold yours in public, not just behind closed doors, of a life that doesn't require hiding, explaining, justifying. The unconscious always seeks wholeness. And every time you silence your intuition, every time you accept a half-love, you step away from that integration. But awareness is the first alchemy. As you begin to see these patterns not as personal failures, but as symbolic invitations, everything begins to shift. This isn't about shame. This is about awakening, about returning to yourself. And so I ask you, can you hear her? That quiet voice inside, the one who doesn't need to be picked, because she is no longer waiting. She is not angry. She is not bitter. She is rising. There comes a moment in every story when the heroine must look in the mirror, not to check her beauty, but to confront her becoming. Perhaps it is night. Perhaps the silence is louder than usual. The world outside may still be spinning in its usual way, but something inside her has stopped, as if a truth has risen from the deep, quietly, without ceremony, without fanfare, and it says, "You deserve to be loved in the daylight, not in fragments, not in whispers, not in pauses between someone else's obligations, but wholly." Isn't that what you've always longed for? A love that doesn't require you to dim your light just to make room for his shadow. A presence that chooses you, not in rebellion, not in escape, but in truth. It's strange how many of us mistake longing for loyalty, how we endure, thinking that the longer we suffer, the more sacred the outcome. But the soul does not thrive in compromise. The soul withers when it is hidden, when it is second, when it is asked to be quiet so someone else can feel at peace in their double life. And your soul is not here to be hidden. You are not here to compete with another woman, for a man who cannot see his own wounds clearly enough to stop wounding others. No, you are not here to be someone's halfway. You are here to be chosen, and not just by him, by you, by the part of you that knows, that has always known, that has waited, not for him to call, but for you to remember. Jung believed in something called the shadow, the disowned parts of ourselves that we bury in the unconscious. When a woman chooses to date a married man, she is often in relationship not just with him, but with a shadowed version of herself, the one who thinks she is not enough on her own, the one who learned, perhaps long ago, that love must be earned through suffering. But here's the miracle. The moment you see the pattern is the moment you are no longer its prisoner. The shame begins to unravel. The story begins to change. And the woman you were, waiting by the phone, checking messages late at night, doubting her worth, she starts to dissolve. Not because she was weak, but because she was done carrying the weight of her own forgetting. You were never meant to be rescued by him. You were meant to rescue yourself. To go deep into the forest of your own soul, face the dragon of your loneliness, and find the treasure buried beneath it all, your sovereignty. Let's speak it aloud, just once, with breath and truth. If he leaves her for you, you will never feel safe. Not because you are unworthy, but because the contract between you was written in the language of betrayal. Even if he is kind, even if he loves you, even if he means well, the roots of your relationship were planted in someone else's heartbreak, and those roots will always ache. Do you see now? This isn't about morality. It's about energy, about what you are aligning yourself with, about whether you are choosing wholeness or reenacting an old ache. And here is where the journey turns. Because the real invitation is not about getting him to choose you. The real invitation is to choose a life where you never again have to wonder if you're enough. To become the woman who no longer waits, who no longer competes, who no longer sacrifices her soul for crumbs of love, but instead builds a table of her own, a life of her own, a peace that is no longer conditional on someone else's freedom. The woman who looks in the mirror and says, "I release what was never mine. I forgive myself for staying too long. I return to myself now, fully, fiercely, tenderly." Because healing is not about hardening. It's about softening back into the truth. And the truth is this: you are already whole. Even now, even here, even with the ache, even with the memory of him still whispering in the corners of your mind. You are not broken. You are becoming. There is a moment, after the storm has passed, after the tears have run dry, after the illusion has finally shattered, when silence becomes sacred. It is no longer the silence of waiting. It is the silence of remembering, of breathing in your own presence, of feeling the weight of your own body in the chair, in the bed, in your life, and realizing I am here, still, whole. Enough. You once thought love was something that came from outside, that it would arrive wrapped in a man's attention, in the poetry of his regret, in the promise of a future where he was finally yours. But the real poetry, it was never in his words. It was in your awakening. You mistook his presence for destiny, but he was not your destiny. He was your mirror, a living invitation to see where you still abandoned yourself, where you still confused sacrifice with sacredness, where you still thought being chosen by someone else would mean you had finally chosen yourself. But choosing yourself has nothing to do with whether he stays or leaves. Choosing yourself means saying no to what wounds you, even if it once thrilled you. It means understanding that no matter how many what-ifs and maybes he whispered into your skin, the truth was always this: a man who cannot stand in his own truth will never be able to stand in yours. And you were never meant to be a secret. You are not a chapter in someone else's lie. You are the book. You are the author. You are the ink. Carl Jung spoke of individuation as the soul's journey toward wholeness, not perfection, not pleasing, not performance, wholeness. And sometimes that path winds through heartbreak, through choices we're not proud of, through shadows we thought we'd buried. But the alchemy lives in the return, in learning to sit with yourself, not in punishment, but in reverence, in realizing that love is not something you steal. It is something you cultivate, day by day, word by word, breath by breath. You are not the woman who needs to wait for someone to be ready. You are the woman who says, I am ready now, for the life that loves me back. Not a life stitched together with apology and delay, but one built in the open, in the daylight, in the quiet peace of knowing you don't have to compete for what is meant for you. So let the fantasy die. Let it burn if it must. Ashes are sacred too, and from them something new will rise. A self you hadn't yet met. A love that doesn't confuse intensity for security. A path that doesn't ask you to hurt another woman just to feel worthy. Maybe one day you will see him again, at a distance, or maybe up close, and you'll feel nothing. Or maybe just a gentle ache, like an old song you used to love before you knew better, before you knew yourself. And you'll smile, because you'll know the truth. He was not the one. You were always the one you were waiting for. So now walk, not away from him, but back into your own arms, step by step, word by word, life by life. You are free now, not because he let you go, but because you finally did. And so she rises, not from his promises, but from her own remembering. Welcome back to yourself. Welcome home.